Joining me right now, I have Dr. Raywat Deonandan, friend of the show, epidemiologist and science communicator at the University of Ottawa. Hello.
Hi, how are you?
Thank you for coming back on the show.
My pleasure.
What do you think about Windsor-Essex moving into stage 2?
Well, I'm glad for them. I'm always going to be worried. Windsor is an interesting place. It's across the river from the big bad USA, and they've also got the farming issues, as you talked about. But it sounds like the numbers are trending in the right direction for them, at least to the extent that it matches the surrounding areas. So it's probably a good thing. And the Premier's announcements of the steps taken to protect the migrant workers, again, they sound really good. They're the right things to do. But we've heard promises before when it comes to managing this disease. So we'll wait and see if the reality matches the rhetoric.
You know what I'm going to ask you, don't you?
Yep.
I hate to do it, but you know people are going to ask me. So,
yeah.
So I have to ask you. Here we are in phase 2, Dr. Deonandan. When is phase 3 coming?
Okay, so this depends on a lot of indicators.
Do you like my tone there? I'm mocking myself, but I really do want to know.
Of course. Obviously, I don't have an answer, but I'll talk around it a bit. So the metrics are going to vary, and there are epidemiological metrics, there are economic metrics, and there are psychological metrics. The epidemiological metrics are fairly easy for me to talk about. There are things like the reproduction number, which everyone seems to understand now. That's the number of new cases produced by an old case, and we like that to be less than 1. If that can be sustained less than 1 on most places in Ontario for a number of weeks, then I think we're probably on the track to opening up more so. The other metrics include the percentage of tests that come back positive, because we're going to test more. And the more we test, the more we're going to find. What matters is the proportion of those tests that show positivity. And if that number is about 1 or 2%, then we're on the right track to opening up as well. But the economic metrics are also important. And how much can people tolerate being in stage 2? How much are we going to suffer? I can't speak to that. Mm-hmm. I know that the province is making decisions based upon the caseload, the number of new cases per day and per week, and we are trending in the right direction there. But we're going to have to wait to see what the data shows. I will say, though, that I suspect that we'll probably see some stage 3 opening before August, because we're going to have to take advantage of the summer weather before it goes away, before we all rush back indoors and this gets worse. So let's maximize that opportunity now.
Before August?
Yeah, I think August should be a month in which we maximize our economic opportunities. And so if at all possible, I think much of the province is going to strive to keep August in a stage 3 format, possibly even July. But the numbers are going to drive that. But it's tempting to want this to happen before the fall, because we all suspect that second wave is going to assert itself in the fall months when the indoor activities increase.
Okay, so kind of a two-part question. There are some bars in Edmonton, I was talking about them a bit yesterday, 6 bars at least, could be more, that have had to shut back down again. So they opened up, everyone was excited, and then a number of staff members or patrons at the restaurants tested positive for COVID-19. And so they voluntarily shut down, which is good to see. They weren't ordered to do it, they did it out of safety. But it does speak to the fact that there's a risk. Anytime you reopen things, people can come in, they can spread the virus around. Do you see that happening here?
Yeah, 100% I see it happening here. Now, do I see people voluntarily shutting down? Well, that's a cultural question. Do I see outbreaks in restaurants? Yes. I think that's inevitable given people's behaviors. Now, I don't know the situation in Edmonton. Were people wearing masks? Was there good distancing in place? Was there good hygiene in place? If not, the shutdown should be used to readdress those concerns. Otherwise, what's the point? I think you take advantage of the opportunity to invest in better control mechanisms. And if we can learn from Edmonton and see where they failed in those particular cases, and we can apply those lessons to our bars and restaurants here, then we can avoid some of that, I think.
And my other question, the second part was, and this is more of a technical question, I'm just trying to figure out what technically qualifies as a second wave. Would that just be called a resurgence of cases when you see the numbers slowly starting to come back up? Is that still part of stage 1 or wave 1? What qualifies as a wave 1 versus wave 2?
I've been asked that question several times today. And there is no answer. There is no agreed upon metric or threshold, but it's eyeballed. If the cases are low for several days or weeks in the single digits, and suddenly they start going into double digits every day and increase further, then we can reliably say it looks like a second wave. We won't really know until we're probably approaching the peak. In fact, if this is indeed a second wave. The USA, though, is pretty clear that they're not in their second wave. They're still in their first wave, and their first wave is just showing multiple bumps. But
yeah, so in the United States, infection rates are spiking. I'm glad you brought that up. In Florida, more than 5,500 people have been diagnosed with COVID-19. In the last 24 hours, more than 13,000 people have been admitted to hospital. They've got workers at Disney in Orlando that don't even want to go back to work. The Magic Kingdom, not so magic. I think they're worried it's going to turn into the disease kingdom or the COVID kingdom. It's set to reopen July 11th, and there's a petition because the workers don't even want to go back. What's your take on what's happening down there?
Oh, it's insanity. Right? So this first and second wave thing, they're not magical. The disease goes away because people do the right thing. They enact public health measures. They go inside. They social distance and so forth. And the second wave manifests when these things are diminished. In places like Florida, they never fully enacted those measures in the first place. So it's not surprising that the curve never really went down and now it's going up again when what measures that did exist are being rolled back again. So this disease loves mass gatherings. If you can avoid a mass gathering, you've got a good chance of preventing an outbreak or an epidemic. Theme parks, amusement parks, those are by nature mass gatherings. Now, there are outdoor mass gatherings, so it's possible to prepare them in such a way to prevent the flow of large numbers of people. I'm not sure how to do that, but I'm sure it's possible. You're an outdoor space, you can probably manage it to some capacity. It's the indoor spaces I'm more concerned about. You know, the shopping malls, the movie theaters, the restaurants. That's a little harder to manage. But we're learning a lot from watching the Americans, and many of the lessons are a little scary. And I'm glad to see that we're in a much better position here.
But how can we ever reopen the border if that's the case?
Yeah, when that vaccine comes, that's when we reopen the border. But good point, right?
When it comes, if it comes, right?
I'm pretty confident we're going to get something resembling a vaccine.
You're firmly in the camp of when it comes?
Yeah, it may not be a perfect vaccine. It might be a tepid vaccine, but something is going to come in the next months, possibly years. But yeah, we're going to get something. Now, it may not give you 100% protection, but I think it'll be sufficient for at least our vulnerable population, and that'll allow some progress. So I'm always an optimist. I see progress everywhere. And other progress includes things like the fear of surface transmission, I think, is a bit overblown. It is experimentally possible to get it from touching surfaces, but it's never been demonstrated in reality. So we should be afraid of getting it from people breathing on us, not so much from the touching of surfaces as much. Take our precautions, but don't panic about it. This is good news. It means that many parts of the economy involving the touching of things can possibly reopen safely.
Dr. Deonandan, I'm going to come clean right now. So you know that I've been very insistent about maniacally wiping down all of my groceries, every single bit. Oh, the bag has got to go in the garbage. It can't go under the sink. Like really, really diligent about it. And finally, on the weekend, I went wild. Yes, this is my definition of getting wild these days. We did not wipe down our groceries. I let it go. I let it go.
I started doing that yet. My physician spouse will not let me let it go, but I think you're probably fine.
But then I lived in fear the rest of the weekend.
You shouldn't.
Right?
You're probably fine.
Do you see?
Yeah.
The neuroses that I have.
Exactly right. We're gonna write papers about this for years to come, about the psychological impact of the panic, which is why
it's real. It's real.
Yeah, this is not about individual risk. I keep saying this. It's population risk. For most of us who get this disease, will be fine. The idea here is to do the right thing such that it does not penetrate deeply into our population and eventually attack those who will have a bad experience with it. So if everyone does their part, this thing can be kept under control such that it does not take over our population. But individually, we're fine.
I thought it was really interesting at the headline the other day. A bunch of Canadians, they did a poll and they said, how do you feel about the social circles that you don't have to physically distance? And a lot of Canadians said, actually, we're good. We want to keep that 2 meters. We've come to like it. We don't feel comfortable. We don't know how to go back to our old ways anymore.
it's a brave new world.
Okay, couple quick things before I let you go. Let's talk again about bubbles. The travel bubble, the Atlantic provinces have agreed to a regional COVID-19 pandemic bubble. So it'll begin on July 3rd, and visitors from outside the region have to adhere to local entry requirements. So this is the 4 Atlantic provinces, and what it means is that they will not be required to self-isolate after crossing the borders. If you live in one of the 4 provinces, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, Prince Edward Island, Newfoundland and Labrador, you can go on a little summer trip and you don't have to worry about quarantining. How do you feel about that?
I love it because those provinces have really gotten the disease under control, and it's an opportunity for them to have some kind of economic activity with minimal risk. Tourism is a big part of their economy, and this will keep a lot of people, humming along quite well. My concern is how well can they manage it? Will people have, false addresses? If you have a summer home in Nova Scotia, we use that to go from Toronto to spend a couple of weeks in Nova Scotia and not have to quarantine. So it does rely a bit on people being responsible. But that is the nature of liberal democracy, that we must rely on individual citizens now to do the responsible thing and to not lie about their addresses and to, maintain their distance when they can. But I do like the idea of this regional bubble. I think it's a creative solution to a problem that no one first saw having to deal with.
What about the rest of the Canadians that are craving a maritime getaway, or Canadians that want to go out to the Rockies, go west? Do you think that they should be permitted to do that without quarantining?
No, I think this is not just one disease. It's multiple epidemics manifesting in different ways across the province. So we have a large country. We can stay in our own provinces for the most part without the need to travel too much further. I don't think it's worth the risk to contaminate someone else's province just to satisfy your travel bug, unless you're in an adjacent province with a similar low caseload, like Manitoba and Saskatchewan probably have similar experiences such that they can probably cross with some impunity. But I think it's fairly irresponsible to rank your need to travel above the need to keep that population safe.
Dr. Raywat Deonandan, always a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you for coming back on.
Thank you for having me.